Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Dr. Alli is an infant physical therapist specializing in non-invasive care for oral ties, milestone delays, head flatness, and head preference. Due to her experience stepping into motherhood, she really emphasizes the relationship and collaboration of the caregiver when treating a baby. She's also a mom, a wife, and a business owner of the Moving Peanut, Pediatric Physical Therapy and Wellness, providing mobile care in Seacoast, New Hampshire, as well as virtual services worldwide. I am so excited to have Alli with me today. Thank you for joining me, Alli.
Yeah, of course. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a blast to finally, like we were just saying, finally actually get to talk to you and not look at your face on social media or be messaging. So it's super fun and exciting to have like a real life conversation, which is so hard to do when everybody's so busy always.
Definitely. I know it's hard. You have to like plan it in and put it in your schedule. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I always jokingly say, but like also seriously that like I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Google Calendar just tells me where to go and what to do.
exactly.
So,
I don't know what's
absolutely.
happening. So,
It's so hard. It's so hard. Well, I'm glad that we finally made the time and that you are here with me today. I'm excited to talk about ties, torticollis, and the connection of them all together because I do think that's something that people hear a lot of and get a little nervous, a little traumatized by those words sometimes. So to be able to talk about the reality of it all is super exciting. But before we dive into it, do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about like you and how you got into the work that you do and why this is like one of your big specialties?
yeah. So I have been a pediatric physical therapist from the get-go. I graduated with my doctorate in 2019, with a physical therapy doctorate, and I took my test. I actually went into like a nursing home initially, and then I was like, I can't do this. I have to go back to seeing kids. So immediately pivoted out of that, and then went back to seeing kiddos. And I've kind of been in like a variety of settings, like a research setting. I've been in the hospital. I've been in long-term acute care, home health, like post NICU, school setting, in-home, outpatient, all the things. So I've done a lot in
Yeah.
pediatric therapy and have a lot of experience in it. I think what really made me dive into like infants, really specializing in infants and like tongue ties and lip ties and all of that fun stuff is that I am a mom myself, and both of my kiddos had some feeding issues. Like, they had to, like, my first, I had to stop breastfeeding her at like 3 weeks old um,
Ugh.
because it was so painful. And then I didn't know anything really about ties at that point. She's now like 3.5. And so, like, I didn't really know what to do. And then at 3 months old, I was able to actually like get her relatched and start breastfeeding again. So,
That's awesome.
breastfed until she was like 12 months. So something that we were doing, like, from a movement holistic perspective was really helping. And it really helped to get her back onto my breast by 3 months old, which was so helpful for me. And that's what really got me into the tongue tie world because she had such bad reflux and the painful latching. I'm like, something is going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what got me started in it. And then my second, she had a mild form of laryngomalacia, which means she had like weakness when she's like with her breathing in her larynx and her throat. So she had some breathing struggles when she was born, and that impeded her feeding as well. And she was diagnosed with like a lip tie, a tongue tie, cheek ties, and all the things.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, but like part of me was like, even though I've learned about this and done all this training, I feel like a release is not the way to go here, which is what like a local provider was telling me to do is like you have to get all
Right.
released. But I was working with her at home, like just like from like a non-invasive, like conservative sort of perspective.
Yeah.
She improved so much to the point like that one of the providers there was like, I don't even know. Like she's like sucking on a pacifier, like the best that I've ever seen a baby do this. And then I'm like, okay,
Wow.
why is she going to get these releases done then? So we
Right.
ultimately to not do the release, and she is doing great. She's like talking up
That's
a
awesome.
storm, like she's just thriving. So
That's
um,
amazing.
yeah, so I like to like tell parents like I've been through like the transition to motherhood struggle myself, and like the feeding issues and the struggles around that myself, and knowing it's not like a cookie cutter one size fits all approach, and there's different options that people can go through, um,
Yeah.
handle those things. Yeah.
Well, I think that's huge. I think that when people hear about ties, and I think, we hear about them being like a fad, and whether you believe they're a fad or not, like whoever does, right? Like listeners, you, I, like realistically, whatever you want to do for your child is the best thing that you can do for your child. And I think that like we know a lot more now. So yes, we do know that there are a lot more ties than I think we did probably years and years ago. But at the same time, we also know there's a lot of other approaches to them. So, whether you decide to do a release of a cheek, a lip, a tongue tie, whatever it may be, or find out and try some of these other alternative things previous to that or instead of that, I think is a really great thing. It's good to just know all of your options, right? And I feel like sometimes when you're with a provider, it's a lot easier for them to just jump to the extreme conclusion of, yes, we need to get a tie, cut because that's
Right.
what's going to have to happen at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many other options. So I'm excited because I know that that is your realm and you've experienced it personally and professionally so much now that, you can share a lot more information about it. So when you brought up the topic, I was hyped to say the least.
Yeah, it's like a taboo thing to talk about because I feel like there's just so many like there's so much like nuance to it. Like there's so many different like avenues you can take. But that's like what you were saying is the exact thing that I try to get across to parents is that you always have to go with your parent, your mom intuition at the end of the day. And I think that like what's damaging is that we aren't giving parents the option of like or like what they're able to do versus like saying like this is like what you have to do and you don't have any other options. Like, and
Right.
like for me specifically, I was by my pediatrician was being told like, no, that would be stupid to get a release done. Like that's not the cause. And then these providers were like, oh my gosh, she's so restricted in her mouth, like
Yeah,
needs all these ties released. And I'm like, can we meet somewhere in the middle here where like I know she's got a
absolutely.
restriction and she's improving without the release. So like how can we, so in my mind I was like, now I know like there are options. Like
Yeah.
I'm not against releases. I'm more so of the mind of like, why don't we hold off on doing them until they're like, okay, like now that we've, done all the things, checked all the boxes, now we can consider getting a release done because like we know like, okay, like this restriction is actually true tongue tie restriction. So we can
Correct.
get that release done and like improve that function.
Right. And I think that releases also people think it's like, oh, you just go in and like, yeah, whether you believe they're uncomfortable during the process or not, you get the release done and they're done. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they pop on the boob or the bottle and everything is great and dandy. When in reality, I find so many of my postpartum clients tell me they're going to go get it looked at, end up getting it done that day, will
Yeah.
come home and be like, oh, well, I wasn't told that I needed to do, these stretches every 3 hours and that my baby was going to be more upset by these stretches or these movements we have to do than the actual release. And I wasn't told that, the release isn't like a done deal. They may need to get a revision or something may try to reconnect or reheal improperly. And there's so many more things to it that I think people don't realize when they're going into it because I think these providers are providing these services so often that to them it's very nonchalant, very like of a natural thing to do. When in for these parents, it's like it's a big life change, and for this baby, it's a big thing as well, right? Hey guys, it's Madison. Yeah, I'm here interrupting myself, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that can feel so overwhelming as a parent, sleep. So, if you are in the thick of the sleepless nights, struggling to figure out how to get your baby and yourself to get more rest, then I want you to know that you're not alone. Here's the thing, if what you're doing is working for you, great, keep doing it. But if it's not, there are resources to help, and I'm happy to be one of them. As a certified pediatric sleep consultant, I work with families to create personalized sleep plans that actually make sense for your current and unique situation. No cookie cutter advice, just practical strategies that match your parenting style and your child's personality. Because let's be real, sleep is not a luxury, it is a necessity. So, if you're ready to make a change, I'd love to help. You can book a free sleep connection call on my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com, or reach out to me on Instagram at serenemomentsdoula.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I think when I was going through it myself, I didn't realize how much conflict there was around the whole, like with my first, I didn't explore like what a revision for tongue ties would look like, or like what the, like I didn't go through that process. I kind of
Yeah.
just like did things on my own. It wasn't until really after that I was like, oh, she must, maybe she had a tongue tie, like maybe this is what was going on.
Right.
So with my second, that's when I was like talking to my pediatrician about it and talking to the providers about it. And that's when I started to see, wow, there is so much conflict and like so like much confusion. I'm even confused as a mom, even though I work in this realm and I work in this.
Right.
So like of course, like I'm sure parents are like, what direction am I supposed to go in if I'm getting feedback that's like conflicting in all areas? So that's why I always like to come across that, like to say that there is a middle ground. You don't have to make a decision right away. If you think that a tongue tie release, like getting surgery, is not something you want to do right now, then your baby will be okay. And if they do get a release, like just kind of giving that information that those results will be a lot better if they get like, prehab, like getting like
Right.
therapy beforehand to help with that function afterwards.
Yeah.
But like I think it's so hard because I never blame a parent for like doing whatever they thought was best in the moment, or what information they were given in that moment, because like of course like a parent is going to follow whatever the provider suggests and what
Correct.
they think is best. So like I never blame a parent for that, even if like they're like, oh my gosh, I did this release and I feel like it got worse. I feel like my baby's so unhappy.
Yeah.
Like I'd never say like that's the parents' fault, because they were just doing the best for their baby with the information they were given. That's what we're all trying to do. So
Yeah, I know. And it can be really stressful, right? Like in situations like that, especially if, you're trying to feed your baby and you're really struggling and you just want to do its best. And every provider is going to believe full-heartedly in what they're saying, right? So they're going to be convincing because that's what they believe. And that's totally fair. But then yes, it does create a lot of conflict because everybody has very different opinions and reads different research articles and, believes in different things and sees different things. So it makes it challenging for sure. Now, I know that you work with a lot of families that have tongue ties or any type of ties, but specifically tongue ties in correlation with torticollis. Do you want to explain to everybody kind of like what torticollis is, and then we can kind of talk about how those two are intertwined?
yeah, yeah. So with torticollis, torticollis is like basically tightness in the neck that can cause a head preference. So typically what it looks like is so that there's these muscles in the sides of the neck that go run from the jaw, like the back of the jaw down to the collarbone, and then like the sternum, the breastbone. And there's like one on each side. And what it does is when one of them is tight, it causes same side bending. So same side bending, like towards the shoulder, and then opposite side rotation. So they'll bend towards the same shoulder and rotate their head towards the opposite way.
Okay.
Um, and so it looks like they have like a side preference. So that's what torticollis looks like. Sometimes with torticollis, what I see is that it causes other muscles in the neck to be tight, in the sense that there's this bone in the neck that's called the hyoid bone. It's a free floating bone in the neck that is an attachment point for muscles that go from the neck and into the jaw as well. So what that does is if those muscles are tight, what's going to happen is it's going to make the floor of the mouth also tight, which
Mm,
in turn can make it look like a baby has a tongue tie, because it's pulling those muscles in the bottom of the or the floor of the mouth back, making it look like they have restriction in the mouth when it's really connected to restriction in the neck. Um,
okay.
so with that being said, a lot of the times with kiddos who are said to have a tongue tie, a lot of the times I see that they actually have torticollis, or they might have tightness in their neck. And if we resolve that tightness, a lot of the times the tightness in the jaw goes away or gets resolved, and then that tightness and restriction under the tongue is so much less, and their feeding gets so much better because that restriction in the neck has been taken care of. Uh,
Mm.
so yeah, I've seen that a lot with kiddos.
Absolutely. I think that's so important to know because I do think people think like, oh, torticollis is just like a tightness in the neck. It just needs to be released. It just needs to be loosened. And then, yeah, that tongue tie, I feel like we hear tongue ties so much more now. And yes, because we know about them, right? But I think there's also a lot of other things that are being mistaken as one another. And that's a really big point. I think people come to the conclusion of torticollis in so many different ways, right? Like your baby's tilting their head, like you mentioned, or they start to get a flat spot on one part of their head. Is that the cause of it? Do they have a tongue tie or is it torticollis? Like
Mhm.
everything is so gray area. It's so challenging. And like we said earlier, depending on what provider you go to, you're going to probably get a different answer for everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to find somebody that kind of, aligns with your views and then also to like go see a couple people, figure out what you think that things are going on, because obviously you're your baby's expert, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I tell parents all the time too, is that like I'm with your baby, an hour a week or whatever it is. Like you are the expert on your own child and
Yes.
them all the time. So of course you're going to notice things that I might not notice or another provider might not see. But that's another thing too, is like if something doesn't feel resonant with you as a parent, you are allowed to get a second opinion. Like you're allowed to see another provider. And that's actually what I did with my second. I saw an OT and they were the ones that said that my baby had all these ties. And just as an aside, like I never like am someone that blames like the provider either, because like you said, like I took a lot of similar trainings that this provider did, and like
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that like I found that I realized that some of the research that goes into the trainings that I took wasn't accurate in the sense of like what's actually shown in the research in terms of
Yeah.
highs and releases and all of those things, what to get released, how to get released, whatever. But I don't, at the same time, like I know that they're very well versed and well trained in what they were trained in.
Yep.
Um, and like don't want to bring any harm to that child or that baby. I think it's just one of those things that it's like if you are of the mindset that like you're like I really want to avoid a tie for my baby or a release for my baby, they might be tied, they might have restriction, but like at the same time, like can I prevent the surgery if possible? So that's when I'm like, okay, like let's go to a different provider. Let's like seek out a different opinion because like if you were going to a medical doctor, like a medical doctor has different experience, like has different like each medical doctor has different experience, different training, whatever,
Right.
going to have different points of view. They're going to have different sets of knowledge skill sets. So I think it's so important to recognize that it's okay if you don't agree with a certain provider. You don't have to take it as like this is the one truth, that this is the avenue I have to go down.
Right.
There are options. But at the same time, like I said, like I also don't blame parents if they decide to go with like a certain opinion, even if it didn't feel that good to them, because like, they're going to take that person's advice over what they might think is their own, because the fact that they might not have that knowledge, they might not be confident in their own intuition in that sense. So,
Right. Right.
uh,
Knowing what to question is hard. I mean, you hear about it with everything, even as starting with, prenatal or birth, right?
mhm.
People are told, okay, just listen to the doctors, but how do you know when you can question what they're doing and when do you actually have options and when are doctors kind of like more just saying what they believe or what they kind of wish for you to do? So it's really it's a constant battle. I tell a lot of my postpartum clients and like the information I'm going to give you is going to be the black and white, and it's your job to find that gray area that you're comfortable with. And that's really goes for so much in this parenting world, but really like postpartum especially,
Yeah.
as you're kind of getting used to all of that.
Yeah.
Now, I know that we talked a lot about how you can take these holistic approaches to, fixing the torticollis and the tongue ties and the things like that. Do you have tips or tricks for if parents are seeing or noticing that their kiddo is having, reflux, latch issues, there maybe have a side preference or some torticollis, maybe they're being told they have a tongue tie or something like that? Are there exercises or things like that that you could attempt to explain, since this is obviously an audio podcast, that you could attempt to explain to everybody of a couple things they could try at home that may help with some of the uncomfortable situations that their little one is in?
Yeah, of course. And like you said, I have like actual like videos of this like on my Instagram and stuff too that
Yes.
point people towards like if they want to reach out. But
That's perfect. Yes.
positional things like so tummy time is great in the sense that it shows us like how is your baby, like what is your baby's strength in their back and their neck muscles look like, how is their tongue moving against gravity in that position. So tummy time is great. I will also say though, with tummy time it doesn't have to look like them on the floor, like not loving that position, especially if they have reflux or gas, they might not be comfortable in that position. So sometimes I'll direct parents to like put their baby on a ball and then just take away some of that effective gravity. So like that they're like elevated, that their head is elevated, but they're not completely flat. So that's
Okay.
what I always like to say to parents, like on your chest is great. It doesn't have to look like flat on the floor. It's great to have that as a progressive like goal. Um,
Yep.
But that's a great one because any sort of pressure on the belly is going to help release gas, is going to help with comforting your baby and like helping with that reflux. But direct pressure, like flat on the floor, they might not love. So I always say
Yeah.
like make them slightly, get them on an incline. So that's one. Side lying is also a great one, like getting your baby on their side, having their shoulders and their hips stacked. Especially their left side is great because it helps with aligning like the digestive tract.
Mm-hmm.
And that just allows for like better passing of gas or like digestion, all of those things. So airway as well. Belly is also great for airway and breathing, so that's also a great one to do just for those reasons. On the back, what you can do is like you can have your baby on your lap, having them like look at your face and then move your face side to side so that they're turning their head in one way,
Uh-huh.
head the other way. So those are just like basic like positional things that you can do. Other
Yeah.
things that you can do is like what I call the crossbody stretch. So having your baby on their back, having like so their legs and their arms are out, and you're bringing one arm, like the one arm, like in like a starfish formation out to the side, and then the opposite leg out to the side in that starfish formation, and then you're bringing their hand and their leg together across their body in like a diagonal
Okay.
line, doing it 10 times like that on one side and then doing the opposite side. And you can count like one, two, like really make it exciting for the baby and have it be a fun thing. Some
Yeah.
babies laugh during this because it's like, this is fun. Like I'm getting stretched out. This feels really good. And then the last one that I really, really like is like what I call like there's no official term for this, but it's like side to side rolling.
Okay.
Basically, you get your baby on their back. You almost get them in like a happy baby position,
Yeah.
and you're having them rock from side to side,
Side to side.
one side and then the other side. And this can be a little scary for parents because babies' necks might like go like kind of like fling from one way to the other.
Yep.
Um, do it slow, count to 10. So if your baby moves their head side to side, that's actually really good for their neck mobility and their tongue mobility as well.
Okay.
And like any sort of restrictions that might be in the neck, that one helps with a lot too. And it just helps release any tension that the baby might have, especially in their back or anything, if they do have tension that could be related to ties or whatever. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I do have videos of those. If
I
anybody,
was just gonna say, I will take this opportunity to remind people, and I always say it at the end, that Alli's information will all be in the show notes below. So please go head over to her Instagram so you can see videos of this, or reach out via Instagram or wherever works best for you to get some information and some help from her. But yes, that's it's so challenging with these types of topics to have podcasts, but at the same time, people can't always watch things. So y'all are listening, and if you find that this is helpful, you'll find videos even more helpful.
knowing too that there are things that can help and activities that they can do to help with any sort of restriction
Right.
is nice. And like I know like me being a mom, like I would go for walks and listen to podcasts. So just knowing like, okay, like sounds great. Like I can go to like, this person's page and find these videos to
Yeah.
help.
And
A
then
good
the thing to know too is like all of the things that you just stated aren't things that are like absolutely insane, wild things to be doing with your child, right? Like we want our children on the floor moving or in some sort of tummy time positioning and moving their bodies and getting used to like all of the different things that their bodies can do, whether they have a tie or not. So it's not like these are things that are going to be like, oh my gosh, now I have to do this and I have to do that still already. No, it's like this is kind of just another way to extend the current activities that you're doing in order to have them help any struggles that you may be having, which I think is so helpful because those awake windows can feel like they're 4 seconds long after you're done with a feeding. So,
Totally. And especially those first 3 months, like I always say to parents too, like don't feel like you have to, like, especially like if you're like post C-section or have had a traumatic birth, it's really hard to get on the floor. So if
yeah.
it's like doing activities like positions on you, just sitting on the couch, having them on your chest, having them inside lying on your lap, whatever works, that still counts. So
Yeah.
I always encourage that, like make it as accessible as possible, especially in those first few months. And that all
hmm
so
I had somebody who did a lot of like, stretching and movement and like baby massage and whatnot. Obviously not as much tummy time, but with their little ones when they were on like the changing pad because it was their they were the happiest there. They had a little mobile hanging above the changing pad. And so this baby was like happy, happy, happy there. They would spend like 10, 15 minutes after feeding just sitting there talking, singing. It was where the baby first started babbling. Like it really was this like happy place for them. So they did a lot of like the stretching, moving, those types of movements in that space. Or same thing if you're changing your baby on the bed. Like you have a lot of space, you can do that there too. There's so many different
Yeah.
ways to do things. I think it's so important to just find what works for you for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think there's so much pressure on parents and especially mothers, like in that new motherhood phase. And it's like all of this counts. It's not like you're not doing enough. Like your baby is happy, is surviving. Like, do what you can and then go from there.
Absolutely. Now, I know that a lot of people listening that may be being told to do releases are going to be hopefully trying some of these things that you're talking about. What does kind of it look like timeline wise for these types of things to start actually seeing some success? What kind of signs will we be starting to see? And then at what point do you find that you're like, okay, this is probably as much progression as we're going to get from these types of things, and maybe it is time to reach out to a provider to do an actual release and not just the holistic stretching side of approach of things.
Yeah. So I think I've only had like really like one or two babies that have gotten to the point where I was like, okay, like definitely we've done like the things that we need to do. Let's try
Yeah.
and see what happens. In the sense that like I was like, okay, like this is like our last option sort of thing. And like for me,
Yeah.
it's about what is the functional problem that we're dealing with from the get.
Yes.
Like what functionally is going on, whether that be the baby does have a lot of gas, they're not able to maintain a latch for a long period of time while breastfeeding, or like they have a hard time getting that latch. They are still experiencing a lot of reflux or body tension, whatever. That neck tightness hasn't completely gone away, even though that we have addressed it. So I always come up with goals at the beginning, like once I look at a baby and assess them. And then if they haven't met those goals by a certain point, or like, within the first like 3 to 6 weeks, especially depending on how old the baby is. I will say that too. Like if the baby's
Yeah.
really young, we'll tend to see faster progression than
Okay.
if he's a little bit older. It might take a little bit longer to see the results that we want to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I typically say that it will take with like guided like work with like a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or something, like it'll take like 3 to 6 weeks to kind of see like, okay, like are we going to take these steps towards release? And like I'm always like monitoring and updating the parent on my thoughts. The babies that I have seen that I've ended up having had a release done, I'm pretty sure like the functional issues were not being able to maintain a latch for long periods of time, and still like having significant amount of gas and reflux. So
Yeah.
like, okay, like I think that at this point, like we've done what we can. Let's like try doing the release. I really think it would be helpful at this point. And it did. It ended up being really helpful. But at the same time, we got as much function and as much range of motion as we could prior to that
Prior
procedure
to.
done.
Right.
So I think with that, it just shows like if she hadn't had all that done, then she wouldn't have had the same success with a release. Uh,
Absolutely.
Run right into it. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's really great to know. And I think the big thing, like a big takeaway from what you just mentioned too, and it was something I meant to mention earlier and got sidetracked, is just because you're a child or you're being told whether they do or they don't have a tie of whatever type doesn't mean that it needs to be released, right? I've had so many people be like, "Oh yeah, my baby has a tongue tie, but like we're not having any issues nursing. They're still nursing. They're content." Like, if something happens down the line, then maybe we look into it. But like right now, everything's going great and that's fine. And so it's just because your kiddo may or may not have a tie doesn't mean that they may or may not need it released. It really, really depends on how much, like you said, their ability to function and get their needs in based on are they able to do that with this tie if they have one. I think that's something else that's really important to kind of note because I think people like now that it's a known thing, their baby pops out and they're like, "Oh, that kiddo has a tie. Like we got to get it fixed, right?" Like, no, it's okay. Like see what happens first. Give it some time and before you jump into getting everything looked at too much.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think with that, it brings up an important point that that tissue like under your tongue, and they call it the frenum, is meant to be there. Like same with like under your tongue and in your like top and bottom lip and your cheeks, like those frena are meant to be there in your mouth for stability. So for instance, if a baby is bottle feeding and they're using their cheeks to stabilize the bottle nipple in their mouth, that frena is what is helping the bottle stay in that baby's mouth and stabilizing their cheeks and having the cheeks stabilized in that way with that bottle. So like just thinking about those things, like if they have tissue there, that doesn't mean that it's restricted. That doesn't mean there's a tie. It just means that, okay, they have like normal anatomy. Great. But if it's like becomes like restrictive, or, moms are starting to notice symptoms related to like painful breastfeeding, or babies experiencing excessive gas reflux, colic, trouble latching, that's when it can be like, okay, like, is this tissue restricted? How can we, resolve that? How can we help that? Versus jumping into like, okay, this definitely needs to get released. We definitely need to do something about this because it is normal anatomy to have that tissue there. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. I appreciate you mentioning that as well. I think that this is so interesting to kind of hear all of the different approaches to it too, because I think, like we said, these are more well known now. People hear about these types of things, and it can be a big stressor for a lot of parents. So knowing that there's options outside of just like jumping the gun and going right to a release, I think can be really, really helpful to a lot of people. So I appreciate you coming and sharing all of that knowledge. Like we said, I will make sure that Alli's information is in the show notes so you can actually see it and you can contact her if you have questions. But overall, I wanted to just say thank you for coming. It's been a blast, and I think that it's been really, really helpful for some people. I already can think about some people that I'm going to send this episode to.
I love it.
I love it. Thank you again.
Yeah, of course. It was so fun being on here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.